Okay. So in the meanwhile, hi, good evening, everyone. I see that attendees are there. So a very warm welcome to everyone. We'll just give it a minute or two to start. We are just waiting for Dr. Dipesh to sort of be on the line. As soon as he gets in here, we'll start.
Uh, uh,
Yeah, Vyapak.
there is a person who has joined as IFSCA HQ. Maybe you can turn.
Yeah, Shreya, if you see in the attendees list, there is this IFSCA HQ.
Correct. That must be him.
1 second.
Possibly, yes.
Yeah, he's online.
Hi, is that Dr. Dipesh on IFSCA? If you can unmute and speak, please.
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you now.
Yeah. So Dipesh sir will join in like 5-10 minutes because he is with chairman now. So
Okay.
there is HOD meeting is going on. So just 5 minutes he will join.
All right.
Sure.
No worries. No worries. So then in that case, we will kick it off. And, as soon as
Yes.
he's online. Yeah, sorry, you're saying something?
Yeah.
Sorry, were
Yes.
you saying something?
Yes, you can go on. Yeah, you
Yeah,
can
we,
go on.
we we'll then start the webinar. And as soon as he's in the room, please, you can start on the camera and we can see him then. But we'll at least begin because we want to sort of make sure that we start on time and also try to conclude in time. So good evening, everyone. Very, very warm welcome. I'm personally talking about it that I'm very, very excited to moderate this panel where we have, I think so we took quite some time to zero down on the topic that we wanted to keep for this webinar. And the whole idea was to make it really interesting at the same time, something which is relevant from, how the industry, how the whole private equity world, how the whole, funds industry is sort of evolving, right? So wanted to make sure that this is an intriguing session. Personally, I'm very, very interested because of the diverse panel that we have here amongst the speakers. So while Dr. Dipesh will join, we have a regulatory front. We have Pratibha, who is naturally from, coming from the private equity world where she is part of the Everstone group. We'll be happy and excited to hear her. And at the same time, we have a very senior seasoned lawyer in terms of Vyapak, who has been out there as part of Desai for years put together and now has become an independent counsel. So we are happy to sort of have, his views also on this panel. In addition to Anita, who is the founding partner at Aequitas Law Partners. Sorry, somebody else has joined. Is that Dr. Dipesh Shah? Okay, maybe we'll wait for him to sort of speak up when he joins. But maybe just sort of without further ado, I think so. I will sort of get going. I think in today's time, the whole importance of the investments, the governance, and even dispute prevention in the funds ecosystem is something which is absolutely relevant for everyone. Where the nature of growth, the nature of the expansions, the nature of multiple fund houses, and the action which all the regulators have seen has certainly led to a very high amount of growth for not only just Indian ecosystem, even globally. It has led to a lot of impact change. So with this aggression out there on the growth side, naturally comes a lot of a question mark in terms of the governance. And which is where even the regulators, whether it is SEBI, whether it is IFSC or even offshore, clearly the regime calls for a lot of check and balance to be in place because of the heightened action which is there. The whole panel which we have here are going to throw light in terms of what I can say the clear focus of this whole session could be the three C's, which is capital, compliance, and conflict resolution. So, which is where I'm going to focus it. Uh, in terms of introduction, I don't think so. We need to spend more time here because I've already spent a very quick one on it, but I don't think so. The speakers really deserve for a longer introduction, given that how veterans we have here on the panel. So my task naturally as a moderator becomes much easier given the pedigree of the speakers here. But to start with, maybe Pratibha, if I can get you in straight in terms of hearing your views, given that from an Everstone point of view, you sit over different strategies as a group, right? In terms of private equity, in terms of credit, in terms of real estate and beyond. So it'd be great to hear your perspective. Let's understand from this whole landscape of the investment ecosystem which is happening and looking at India as a focus, right? How do you see the current legal regulatory regime and the environment? Let's talk about mainland from an India point of view. Maybe if you can throw some of your views as a global investor, how do you see Gift City also evolving? But want to understand from a fund manager, from a GP point of view, if you look at the whole landscape of legal regulatory regime, is it too restrictive? Is it too relaxed? Or how do you see it? Is it a good play? Do you see good anticipation coming in from the regulator, when they look at how funds are, playing it out, and therefore they also want to make sure that something as a line is there and it's not crossed. So as a manager, I just want to hear from your perspective. Of course, you are in your expertise from a legal point of view, so it'll be great to hear from your, lens as to how you see that.
Sure, thanks, Sambhav. Happy to be here. When you talk about India and Indian regulators, you can never, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say any regime in India is very relaxed. So that's a non-starter. And it's for a good reason. We are not you know, financial jurisdiction per se. It's a real jurisdiction with significant retail investors and not that long a history of financial markets. And so people are still getting educated on the products, and we've just not had that many complex products introduced in India. Just because of the worry of regulators, all the regulators, anybody I talk to, they worry about retail investors and their knowledge and depth of financial markets. And so anytime you see any Indian regulations, it will be complex, just given that background. Having said that, in 2015, when the AIF regime first came in place, it was light touch comparatively to other regulations in India, and it has of course evolved and become more complex as we've seen Indian retail market investing into the AIF market. So I think that's been the seminal change you'll see in the recent years. To start with, it was a big boy play, and then increasingly the domestic investors have started investing in the alternative ecosystem and through AIFs, mainly in mainland, and therefore we've seen SEBI tighten the norms. And with that, obviously, the complexity has also increased, but also nuances have come about as far as SEBI is concerned. So you've got the concept of LVFs, large value funds, where you've got a comparative light touch because that's more for the institutional players. But anybody who's then taking retail money, SEBI's really cracked down on those regulations, made sure there's uniformity with respect to, whether it's valuation norms, whether it's mandatory DMAT, whether it's employee certifications for key people, whether it's side letters with investors, the terms that you can provide various investors. So all of that has been in the last few years, and it's a direct result, I think, of the kind of players coming into the market and the kind of feedbacks that we've gotten. If we talk about disputes, there we know that in the last couple of years there have been high net worth LPs who have gone to SEBI and complained about certain practices, as a result of which SEBI's cracked down. And that's why I think, even though you haven't seen that many disputes between LPs and GPs in India yet, I think it's something that's waiting to happen. I think standard reaction is to go to the regulator and let the regulator fight that battle for you. But we still don't have necessarily rules around misrepresentation, mis-selling, or any case law around that developed yet. So I'm sure Vyapak would love to talk about that because I think
Yeah.
as fund houses, like as GC, that's something that I worry about. That even though the laws are not there, what in practice if there is a complaint, how would the regulator or the courts deal with something like that? Um, the gift city regime, of course, has been coming up really well, especially for the onshore GPs who wanted an alternative. Everstone, of course, has a significant presence in Singapore. All our management significantly here, but I think for domestic GPs, the gift regime has been a real game changer, and
Yep.
we've seen that regime go from there. But I think one aspect that's still missing, not because of effort from the gift city, but I think it's an RBI issue, is allowing domestic money to go to gift city and pool there with international money and come back into India. I think if we allow that, that will really be a game changer for the purposes of how much we see growth of money moving and GPs moving to gift. So I'll stop there for now.
Sure. No, I mean, I think so clearly the message is when I started with three C's, I think so maybe if I can add the fourth, there is complexity out of, the way you put it up. But rightly so. I think so the kind of growth that the AIF industry has seen, I mean, just Indian AIF industry alone, I think so we are talking about total investment commitments which are upwards of $200 billion, right? We are talking about an year-on-year jump of 25%. So the kind of rapid growth and the traction which this industry has seen, clearly, I think so the game has been up even from a regulatory point of view. So yeah, there are a lot of things which I'm sure we are going to witness in times to come in terms of a lot of unwinding, like you said, the LPGP disputes, for example.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think so. That's a great perspective to hear. But sorry, I'm just taking a pause for a moment because I wanted to make sure that I say it loud that I want to thank IVCA as an association for collaborating for this webinar. Big thanks to the entire Rajat, Akriti, and the entire team for collaborating on this one along with us. Thank you for that.
Well, on a shout out to IVC, I think if there is a dialogue between SEBI
Yes,
and the industry, it's happening because of IVCA. So I think that
absolutely.
dialogue really helps with removing the complexity for the GPs. So it's a very important role that IVCA plays.
No, absolutely, absolutely, certainly, and great, in terms of turnaround, in terms of the bridge between the players and the regulators. I think so. Clearly, that's well acknowledged. Vyapak, coming on to you, I think so. What will be great to hear from you is in light of this, ever growing industry, the likelihood of disputes, the likelihood of checks and balances, which leads to whether it is with the regulator, whether it is between the, let's say, LPGPs, for example, or whether from an investment ecosystem. I think so there are several scenarios out there in terms of the disputes. But what I wanted to hear from you is, I think the first question which comes to my mind for you is, we have seen how, Singapore, for example, as a jurisdiction, or let's say LCI as an institution, right? SIAC and LCI and others, which have done groundbreaking changes. In fact, in a lot of Indian transactions, we refer to such institutes when it comes to dispute resolution mechanisms, right? Where do you see India is heading? I think so. There has been a lot of focus about trying to see if India can become the destination for resolving disputes. Do you think that's something on the cards likely to happen in, let's say, coming years, or are we still very far from that bar?
Yeah. So I think when it comes to disputes, particularly for this industry, right? There are, I think Pratibha has well put, there are two broad parameters or two broad spectrums. One is with the regulators or in reference to regulations. So it can be at the time of setting up, and there are some issues around it, and post setup, if there are non-compliances or LPGP fighting or internal investor fighting with the in under the contribution agreement, and then of course with the portfolio companies. So one is your regulatory part of the disputes, and then there are private disputes, right? So far as regulatory part of disputes are concerned, obviously there can't be any other destination but India, because it stems out of the regulations here and issues related to Indian regulators, right? So obviously that part of the disputes I'll cover in a minute. But the other part of the disputes, which are private disputes, either LPGP or inter se promoters of the fund or the investors in the fund, or it is in reference to the carry for the general partners, or in reference to the portfolio companies. I think by very nature, right, unlike many other industries, this is quite global, in sense there is funds are set up outside India, they are investing in India, investors are coming from outside India to invest in India. So by very nature, it is global. So to say that uh, we compare ourselves with SEAC or LCIA, I don't think that's a good start, because by very nature, we may need an independent jurisdiction to deal with these issues. But yes, on an absolute terms, where are we in terms of that process? And I think the answer lies in the question. When we talk about other jurisdictions, we talk about institutions and not jurisdictions. When it comes to India, we talk about the country and not the institutions. And I think that's what SEBI is trying to do, right? They are trying to make sure that many of these disputes, even if it is private in nature, like the LPGP, Pratibha was saying that how do we bring back to the regulator and resolve it? They are trying to create institutional platform to see if this can be resolved. Now, for smaller disputes, of course, there is whole ODR platform, the online dispute resolution platform, stemming out of the scores platform and going into conciliation and arbitration, only from a perspective of efficiency. So SEBI experimented it in the I think 22, 23, and now they are back to the question whether that experiment was good or bad, and whether we need to go back to the original or we need to reinvent ourselves. So the good news is we are I would say we are making mistakes quickly and admitting it, and are up for change. So I would put it in the way that this is one regulator that if we are able to put our questions right, they are ready to listen and give us at least possible solutions. So I think from a regulator perspective, we are there. I don't think we need to be any negative or skeptical about it, right? It's an evolution. It's new. It is still at a very nascent stage. We have to go a long way, and that can be taken care of. On the private disputes, yes, I think we also need robust institutional framework to deal with large scale disputes or complex high value disputes. That is where I think India, while in 2019 we had our own high powered committee report by Justice Sri Krishna and its committee, that how institutional framework has to come in. I think this industry has not got its own due, right? Because of the lack of formalizing the institutional framework around dispute resolution, for a simple fact that this industry is not, and one needs to understand, right? Most of the businesses start with a fundamental starting point that they are basically there forever, right? You always say that when you set up a company, it is basically you start with a concept that these are forever, and therefore the kind of decisions you make is on that basis. While this industry is limited to time, so unless we are able to create dispute resolution mechanisms which are possible to resolve those disputes within the fund life, within the time when the commitments are getting due for repayments and otherwise, obviously we are going to see more and more of these disputes getting resolved outside than in India. So I think that's the part that in my view we are still a few steps behind the curve so far as this
Sure.
industry is concerned.
No, I think so. The message is clear in terms of few steps taken and long leaps to take. I guess that's where we are. So I think so. This whole, the whole talk about, getting a proper institutional framework in place. I think so. That's something where if all stakeholders get into play together to get that in place, I think so we can see this further strengthening up in terms of, resolution mechanisms which we want in play. Thank you so much, Dr. Dipesh, to join along. We are really excited to sort of hear from you as well. And so while we kicked off from a time point of view, but just taking it back in terms of getting your views first and now, we'd be happy to hear from you. So, I mean, what we want to hear to start with from you, and because there's a time constraint, so I'll try to sort of straight jump in terms of what we want to get to. Would be wonderful to hear from you in terms of, the short time span within which the entire landscape from a gift city as a regime that has evolved for India, right? I think so. What we want to understand, what and how do you see this heading on from here? This is, of course, it's a game changer. That's what Pratibha also mentioned, and clearly it is in terms of the regime that Gift City has come in terms of, the entire funds ecosystem, whether it is for India bound or whether it is for outbound. And in fact, not only just funds industry, I think so there is a lot more to it when it comes to Gift City as a regime. So it'll be great to hear from your perspective what kind of evolving landscape in terms of legal, regulatory, and including just generally overall as a regime. If we can in brief hear from you, that'll be great for the audience here.
Yeah, Sambhav, what I would suggest is that, see, my team is also trying to log in from another system if it works.
Okay.
So maybe the next speaker, you can get him started, and the moment my video comes in, I can. So I'm here only. I'm on mute. Moment the video starts, I'll come in.
That also works. So yeah, sure.
Unless
we would love to see your face.
Unless and until, yeah, unless and until you don't want to see the face of the regulator, it's a different matter.
No, like I said before,
we
would love to see
that would be the end of the webinar, not seeing the face of the regulator.
Yeah. So we clearly on this webinar want to see the face of the regulator, right? Vyapak, right?
Yeah. So I'm just waiting in the. By the time the video comes in, I'll start.
No worries.
I request the other speaker.
Sure. Start. No, absolutely, certainly. No, great. So Anita, we point on to you after hearing Pratibha and Vyapak. So maybe getting your perspective. See, you advise a lot of large institutions on their fund setups. Whether it is SEBI, whether it is IFSCA, whether it is offshore, across strategies you are dwelled quite in, right? I wanted to understand from you, getting your perspective, advising where, from a lot of these fund managers, the GPs. How is their focus in terms of when it comes to corporate governance, right? When we talk about corporate governance generally, I mean, there is a lot of focus when it comes to a lot of businesses, industries across. But what about fund governance? Is that something that there is a strong focus with all the GPs that you closely work with? Do you see that they really put efforts to make sure that even internally in the fund structure and the ecosystem, there is a manner and mechanism of governance being focused into?
Sure, Sambhav. I think interesting question. Yes, there is a lot of focus now. As Pratibha mentioned, right, the regulatory regime has evolved and there's a lot of emphasis on the governance aspect and not just complying some regulatory provision as a tick box from a compliance standpoint, right? So I think what we've noticed on the GP side, right, a lot of these decisions are now taken in the very rightful manner, be it whether it is from a regulatory standpoint or a contractual standpoint, right? There is a fundamental overarching principle which is kept in mind while taking decision, and which is basically acting in the best interest of all investors rather than thinking more from a perspective of selective investors, right? Second, I think important aspect which we've seen now, as a lot of GPs manage multiple funds which may have like overlapping strategies, right? So there's a lot of focus on the deal allocation policy in terms of which fund should receive the deal in priority in case of overlapping investment strategies, and there are overlapping commitment periods, right? So there's a lot of focus on that. There will be a clear investment policy which will address all of these things, right? Now, coming from a gift city standpoint, right, as we are aware that lot of gift city funds focus on foreign capital fundraising, right? and they would target various geographies, multiple investors in different geographies. The fund houses or the GPs, they are also very mindful when it comes to placing their product in these geographies, right? They do take focus on cross-border marketing regime, right? Because at times in few jurisdictions, the regulatory regime would be very comprehensive. It may require some licensing requirement for fund managers or funds, right? So there is a lot of effort taken on this front where they try to set up an internal process which takes care of their cross-border marketing regime, right? I like, there would be set of GPs who would want to rely on reverse solicitation process, but I think that shift is there where they're just not taking calls on reverse solicitation. They are actually taking effort to reach out the councils in the respective geography and make sure that there is a robust internal governance process when it comes to tapping investors in various geographies, right? Because you would not want to expose your fund or your GP entity in terms of regulatory scrutiny from an offshore regulator, right? Because that really impacts your repute in the global geography when it comes to fundraising process, right? Because any kind of a warning there, it could really adversely impact your future fundraising process. So we do see a shift because the ecosystem has evolved. There is a lot of effort on the internal controls, conflict management frameworks, because at times GPs would manage multiple businesses, be it managing AIF, advisory business, they would have wealth business. So we do see a lot of effort being put in on the conflict management framework, risk management framework. So absolutely, there is a focus on the fund governance. Maybe we need to step up our governance process a little more, but yeah, but we are on the right path from a GP standpoint.
So that's very pleasing to hear. So clearly, I think so the focus is there, and given the kind of sophistication, given the kind of complexity, even from laws and regulations point of view, I think so the last thing which a fund manager would want is any kind of, inquiry or investigation or any kind of these orders coming around, which we have seen happening in recent times. So which is great to hear. I think so if that's something which is being looked at not as a back end, but rather more at front end amongst the fund managers and the GPs. I think so clearly that is good to hear. Pratibha, getting you in again, I think what will be helpful to hear from you, given that you are, from a structure which is pretty much global in terms of how you see your investor base, right? The LPs I'm referring to. So I just wanted to hear from you, when the LPs evaluate, let's say Everstone as a structure and looking at, India as an investment destination, right? What in your conversations with them or in kind of dialogues with them, I think so. What we want to understand is what are their top concerns when it comes to India as a geography, right? Whether I mean, of course, I'm referring to more from a legal and regulatory, which is where I'm sure you can weigh in. But in terms of LPs evaluating, the GPs and looking at investing, are they pretty much smooth? It's ever, greening in terms of how it's evolved, or there are still a lot of red flags which they do as part of their evaluations?
So, Everstone's unique because any of our deals are have to have an India focus. We're pretty much India centric. So in that sense, if somebody is coming to us, it's for India exposure. But I'll differentiate between having India exposure versus having an India structure. Not all our LPs are necessarily yet comfortable with having an India structure. That's why even the AIFs that we have, we will have a structure where we've got our Singapore fund structure, and then we've added an Indian AIF for investing in India, if at all. And I can talk about gifts separately, but I think that's really what I talked about before, the difference between being a financial jurisdiction versus a real jurisdiction, right? India is not a financial jurisdiction. It's not focused on making revenues by allowing, financial structures. You've got retail investors investing in India, and hence you've got a, real regulator in SEBI, and therefore, you will have the complexities that you have, and it's really our job as a GP to, ease that process for our LPs. But if you ask an LP straightforward, they will find the Indian structure more complex because the ability not to have side letters, the ability not to do certain structures that you can do globally, leverage, a lot of other issues that there or other upsides that you have in certain jurisdictions. For very good reasons, SEBI has limited. On top of that, you've then got let me put it this way. India is a top destination in mind of all LPs, for sure, globally. But there is also competition for that top slot. Ultimately, there are only a few jurisdictions they're going to put money in. While India is always in consideration, I think our job is to make sure that we simplify that as much as possible, and that's our constant dialogue with the regulators. And of course, GIFT is most well receiving in that regard in terms of making quick changes. But we are in constant dialogue with whether it's DPI, DEA, SEBI, RBI, in terms of making life easy for foreign investors to invest into the country. And I think it's a journey that we are on and takes a little time. It's a bit of a push and shove. Because of the complexity of India and size of India, the approach of a principle-based regulation can't be taken up. Oftentimes we say, you just go catch the ones that have done, structures that don't meet the legal requirements, rather than making tighter regulations. But it's just not practical also because again, Vyapak can talk about this, but it's just litigation is complex in India, even for the Indian regulator. Going to SAT and going to courts is not easy for them either. So it's just easier for them to tighten the rules to protect the retail investors. So there are complications. As an Indian, I can justify it, but as an LP, they're just looking at what's easier to invest in. So balancing the two is the job that a good GP, a good Indian GP does.
Great. No, I mean that perspective is helpful. While we see this whole growth trajectory, of course, it's important to sort of keep in mind, even from the ecosystem, and not only just the private players, but even from a regulatory point of view, how the global LPs look at and what are their concerns to be addressed. I think so. If that's something that's always on the radar, which will work well for the growth of the country as well. Finally, we can see the face of the regulator. Thank you, Dipesh. Thanks for joining us. Pleasure, both IVCA and all of us to have you here. In terms of when I started, I said we have, a capital view here in terms of Pratibha coming from Everstone Group. We have Vyapak and Anita who can give perspectives even from the perspective of, dispute resolutions and conflict and all those scenarios. But clearly, what can be heard from you is something which is important for core for all of us is the compliance, the whole regulatory regime and side of things. So would be great to hear from you to start with. One, in a short journey, there's a lot which has been achieved when it comes to GIFT City as a regime, and you have been at the forefront in terms of how the whole landscape has opened up. Question is, where is this heading from here in terms of the regime opening up for the financial services and perhaps even beyond? So some insights from you will be great for the audience here.
Sure. Thank you, Sambhav, and my apologies for little late and also with this technical glitch that we had. Are you able to hear me?
No problem. Yeah, we can hear you, but if you can be a little closer to the system or mic.
Okay. I hope this is better now.
Yeah, much better now. Much better now. Please continue.
Okay. Thank you, Sambhav. I think IVCA has really planned this very well. This is what the industry wants. They want industry to operate without seeing regulators very often. I think this was, in a way, this is what the IFSCA was also trying to do. You have to come less to us. You don't need to see us more, and the business should be able to operate without the intervention of the regulator. So, in a way, I'm thankful that the IVCA system is also trying to guide that this is how the industry should operate. But I think let me give a quick perspective of what is happening here. See, we are at a stage that 410 funds are registered now in the IFFC zone. There are 240 plus fund managers registered here. We have 9,500 investors in the IFFC zone as we speak, which have come from 70 different jurisdictions that they have invested into GIFT. $39 billion of commitment has been raised by these funds, out of which $19 billion have been invested into India and outside. So this is the pan picture of last 3 and a half years of coming out with the FME regulation. And obviously, I'm not comparing ourselves with what Singapore is and what others are. Obviously, they are far ahead in the race, and they are a very huge lead time. And IFFC has to really catch up very fast to where it wants to reach ultimately, as we say, to the goal. But I think the starting has been quite encouraging. The industry has picked up from two perspectives, that the cost of operating in GIFT City, the fund, is the lowest across the globe. And I always used to, tell Pratibha also in her earlier role at the Nishit Desai's office. Whenever I used to visit Nishit Desai's office, he would have doing business in Dubai, doing business in Mauritius, doing business in Singapore, but there was no doing business in India or doing business in GIFT. So that always made us a little worried that, look, everybody has to go out to do India business. Then how is India going to grow? And probably government of India fortunately found this structure, found this way out of creating an offshore center within onshore India. And thanks to all who are involved, including IVCA, including people on this call, and the larger financial ecosystem players who put their faith that, look, it is doable in India. You can structure a global funding GIFT. You can invest into India. You can invest outside India, sitting in India. And still, regulatory wise, tax law wise, cost competitive wise, you can still be very, very competitive. I think that is, according to us, is probably as we call it, a confidence building exercise, that in 3.5 years, structures have moved, tax laws have moved, and everything is working smoothly here. So from here on, from 400 funds to say 1,000 funds, is the journey visible? I would say yes, it is visible. We can easily touch 1,000 funds. Maybe in next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, in the industry will tell. But that roadmap is visible, that you can easily touch 1,000 funds. Now, if that is the roadmap that we are seeing, what is that as a regulator we need to do more? And that's always the question, because I think in this industry, what I've realized in last 15, 18 years in GIFT is that they will always have suggestions for regulators. When you ask them as a fund, what is your plan? They will say, we have to discuss with the head office, we have to discuss with this, that. They will never give you the answers, what they need to do. They will always have suggestions as to what regulator needs to do. So we are always on the receiving end as a regulator when you interact with the AIF industry. And to top up that, they have a firepower of lawyers, they have firepower of consultants who from nowhere will bring out the issues which can actually never happen in India, but they will throw all these issues on you, saying that if I come to give somewhere, GAR will come into play, what happens? Then we say, okay, you go to Singapore, what happens? They said, you can't argue with the Singapore regulator. Whatever the law is there, you have to follow the law. And rarely a consultant will say that the MAS XYZ regulation is not in line with the international best practices. So all these suggestions, I think, is what happens within the Indian ecosystem. And as a regulator, we are always on the receiving end. You should do this, you should do that, you should do that change. And we accept all this. In last 2.5 years, we've been absorbing all those changes, suggestions which used to come to us. But I think on this particular webinar, I would like to request the participants to change the perspective. It is now important that what as an industry you need to do, that has to be properly articulated. As an AIF industry, where you want to go, As an AIF industry, what you are not doing. As an AIF industry, everything cannot be regulation, everything cannot be tax. Government has done so much, regulators have done many things. As an AIF industry, what are the best practices? If the AI is coming in, as an AIF industry, how you are coping up with the AI changes coming in? Those type of things has to be more heard by us also as a regulator, that look, the industry is going for these changes now, and that will also help us to understand what my future regulation should look like. uh, I cannot keep hearing only the pain points. I also need to understand from you your growth plan, and as a regulator, what I need to do to achieve you that growth. But that growth plan is not articulated. So my request on this call to the industry and IVCA in particular is, what's the growth plan of an AIF? What's the role that you see, how then the gift can be a key enabler? And then we will figure out. We've been trying to work out the regulations to make sure that you ultimately reach that goal, but that articulation is somewhere missing. Second, I think from an ecosystem perspective, we were also told that bring in key enablers, like for example leverage, which has been brought in. We've been told that you bring in platform play, which has been brought in. We've been told that now the whole onboarding process, can you do it, seamless? Can you bring in the entire onboarding of a foreign national or an NRI through through an online mode onboarding process? To be honest, on this call, we believe that the whatever the steps were required to bring in the changes to the regulation, to the circulars, to the this, has been carried out. Now, for example, we saw a service provider who came to GIFT. He presented to us he can onboard an NRI and he can onboard a foreign national in 60 minutes. And we saw the demo, and everything was working from a GIFT City perspective. When I asked the industry players, and to my surprise, the industry was not aware that this type of solution exists in the market. Then we organized a call of the service provider with the industry. To our surprise, none of the service provider and the industry were connected. Now, this is where we get little worried. Look, you have all the suggestions in the world for a regulator, but there are solutions available in front of you in the market which you are not looking at. Now that worries us, that these are available solutions which the industry should adopt easily, and there should be no time taken to get those solutions onboarded. Now, those type of things I would suggest that the industry should have a closer look at. And my last point probably is that, look, there are a lot of noise which keeps coming around the UBO onboarding, the ultimate beneficial owner, and all, and the norms of the PMLA around it. And I know we've been asked that, can you clarify if a regulated fund from outside brings the fund into the GIFT City fund, whether it has to go to the UBO level? So everything we have on recently, the FAQs, we have clarified that also. Now everything is clarified. It is now industry to come to up to the speed of what all has been enabled, because I see two challenges, and this is with my experience. I'm telling that, see, my earlier problem when we started the IFFC zone, it was regulated by the domestic regulators. All the four domestic regulators were the regulator of this. The problem statement that time was domestic regulators are too much on table. So how can they look at the change perspective of GIFT, because they were already on into so many things in the domestic sector. Government brought in a unified regulator, but now the question have changed. It is that the domestic funds which are now getting onboarded here and creating a GIFT City fund, the problem with them is they are too much onboarded with the domestic law. Again, they are not looking at in the GIFT City fund as from a different perspective or with a different team. They are the same people managing the domestic. They will have somewhere responsibility to manage. Although I know that you comply with POCO, you everywhere you have a tick mark that you have a principal officer, you will have a compliance officer. Or what is the need of the hour? The need of the hour is you need to have a right senior team to govern and run your AIFs in GIFT. If you are not having that, and you want to, run it through the back channels from wherever you are in Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, that's not going to work for this fund to really scale up, because then these people are dependent on your head offices. If the simple solution they come across, they are not able to speak to you for at least a week. Now that type of scenario should change, and you should really make sure that you really make this as your offshore fully functional, with all the independence and powers for them to run the AIF in the way that you really want it to grow. If we don't come to this structure, I think we will keep, facing challenges. Then what will happen is, you will come to me with all the domestic issues. You will come to me with all those, fear that you have in your mind, and the same issues will keep coming back. So my point is, the industry have seen the results. Industry is experiencing the investment, the $39 billion, 19 billion invested. They have, probably a visibility of $79 billion. That's what our team tells us. Now, if this is a reality, I think you need to more focus on the global investors through Gift City, and make sure that your team really gears up to grab those opportunities with all the independence, with all the powers to function as a real AIF operating in the global center.
Sure. No, sounding clear in terms of the message there. I think so. There were times where, people were fast, perhaps the regulators were slow. Sir, I think so. The message which you are giving is very clear. Regulator is clearly fast, and I'm sure a lot of players need to catch up. So we take that. We absolutely take that.
I'm not claiming that regulator is fast. Don't take me wrong on the call.
No, no, not at
I'm
all.
only saying is the industry need to really, get going.
Sure. No,
I don't know, Pratibha, if you have anything, because I'm sure it's not in form of a debate in that sense, but how you have seen change in the regulators' approach, right? I think what possibly Dr. Dipesh is saying, that there is a big change in the approach and the readiness and willingness to also further change. But
for sure.
it needs to be reciprocal in some sense, not in a literal sense, but some reciprocity from an industry perspective. So do you see that playing
I think what has really happened is, and Mr. Shah knows this, I think the interaction between the industry and the regulator has become very strong. And, like we were mentioning before, IVCA has played a significant role in that. And the industries really come together under that umbrella to work with the various, whether it's SEBI, whether it's GIFT. The dialogue is like on a regular basis. I see how much dialogue Dr. Shah has with the industry, individually and through the forum. So that I think is a very welcome change, because both sides understand they have the responsibilities. So, SEBI created SFA, where they've put it really on the industry now to help them draft the rules. They say, like make the naughty child the monitor. So you draft it, then you can't complain about following the rules. And I think that's the interaction with the gift is at the same level, where you're constantly interacting, then you can't really complain that it's a regulatory issue. I don't think with gift it's a regulatory issue anymore. But it's also nature of times, Mr. Shah. Like the global environment is so uncertain. One thing gets resolved, another comes up. So, whatever plans we have for growth have, unfortunately, even though India is very well placed for growth, the global uncertainty has been a real dampener on, some of our investment strategies for India and for growth for India. So, while we would have come for certain structures that, things that are out of our hands, and then, it affects the rupee depreciation also, unfortunately. Nothing to do with India, nothing to do with us. But we keep trying, that's our purpose. One suggestion I had, and I know you don't, this is not a gift issue at all, But even if in a limited sense, we can find a way of getting domestic money, because the industry is very focused, as you know, on making sure that we have a very strong domestic investor base. And we've done really well in that, in terms of, giving comfort to the Indian institutional investors and high net worth individuals. And now with NPS coming up, even if we can create a sandbox where, maybe just the government institutions like SIDB, NIF, NPS, Fund of Funds can invest in GIFT, co-invest with international investors. And then, that money can come back in and for investments. If we can convince the RBI, I think you will see a lot more registrations coming and, bigger funds coming into GIFT potentially through that structure. So that was just one recommendation I had.
Sure. Maybe I think so. What we'd also be happy to hear, maybe if Vyapak or maybe Dipesh, Dr. Dipesh, if you want to sort of weigh in. I think so. Just from a topic point of view, also wanted to understand what steps do you think? I mean, even from an IFSC, we know, like for example, SIAC has a presence in GIFT City, right? So as a dispute resolution mechanism, do you think that we can look at even GIFT City, for example, being a center to resolve all large amount of global disputes, some high stakes, high value disputes which needs a resolution? Do you think that something is also on the focus and likely to evolve
Yes.
over times?
Yeah, I'm sure Dipesh would have something to add, but there has been a significant movement on that as well.
Yeah.
There was a committee set up, and a report has already been filed to see how there can be an independent regime for resolving GIFT City disputes. Within the framework of the GIFT City, you don't have to technically travel out of GIFT City for that purpose. But that also goes with, I guess, the view that Dipesh was trying to suggest, that you need to have senior involvement and serious involvement when you set up your entities there. Because I think that regime will only work if it doesn't become a venue for a post box, but it becomes a venue where decision makers and senior people are there. So there has been a report out. We can share it with the participants, that there is a movement done to see if an institution independent to GIFT City can be set up with a slightly independent regime than the domestic regime for arbitrations, so that it is more effective and efficient, where right from the start of the dispute to enforcement, you don't have to go out. So it becomes a dispute village as well, in that sense, to bring in everything into one regime. And it may not be emulating or copying other regimes, but it is also addressing some of the issues that India is facing for domestic seated arbitrations. So this is a hybrid system, and there is a committee report on that, specifically coming up with the solution. So I don't know where those action points are at the moment, but Dipesh, unless you have something more, but I can tell you there has been a serious step taken in that direction as well.
Sure. Dr. Shah?
Yeah, I think there has been a budget announcement on this for setting up an international arbitration center in GIFT, and post that IFSCA has worked with the concerned stakeholders, including the ministry, and I think it's now moving to its logical further steps. So, I'm sure the government has announced this, and the necessary steps are being taken. Meanwhile, we are also aware that the commercial courts in the high courts have also become operational, and maybe some sorts of the mechanism of disputes are also structured through those special courts, which are already part of the ecosystem. But we are well aware of the dispute resolution as an important enabler, and the government has taken the necessary steps. At this stage, I can say that it's a work in progress. This will become a reality as we move forward, once we have the government gives us a final structure on this.
So if I may just add little technical issue here, right? I think we all understand GIFT as an independent territory, but it is not a foreign territory, right? It is still India. So I think the regime for income tax and the regime for securities law and regime for foreign exchange laws, creating a kind of a imaginary structure, right? To say this is not India for the purposes of X, Y, and Z, that may not directly work for an arbitration regime because it is still India seated. It would be still Gujarat seated and therefore subject to everything what happens in Gujarat happens in GIFT City. So I think that's the a slight, I would say, I would not say a roadblock, but something which needs to be addressed to make sure that there is a fictional, regime created for this purpose to make sure that it suits the purpose of the kind of dispute regime. And I think that will all solve the problems that we were talking at the start, whether it is SEAC, LCIA, or India, because we were talking about India, right? Now we are, and that was my answer to you. What we need is an independent institutional framework and not worry about what's happening in India otherwise. Same thing has happened for the financial services as well. Rather than worrying about what happens to investment regime for rest of the India, we are trying to see how GIFT City can, work for many other solutions which otherwise domestically may not be available. So I think with the same objective, this is getting developed and it's at a good advanced stage.
Sure. No, I just thankful. Thanks to both of you. I think so. Just want to be cognizant of the time as well. Maybe Anita, if I can bring you one last question. Just wanted to hear from your perspective also, given that, and not only just focusing only purely from GIFT point of view, but look, I just want to understand what are the learnings for a lot of GPs, because now we can see that, the regulators clearly are increasing the action, right? There have been orders, there have been notices to even the GPs which have come in, right? There are a lot of there out there in public domain as well. So in terms of, can I understand from you, because you have done a lot of evaluations, you have been part of a lot of inspections as well, advising such GPs. So what are the learnings, what are the things, and what are the key issues which, some of these GPs need to be mindful in terms of these actions ever increasing?
Yeah, sure. I think thanks, Sambhav, for that question. And before we move on to the answer, I think I really want to thank and appreciate both the regulators, be it IFSCA and SEBI, right? They have really taken a lot of steps from a ease of doing business, right? And hopefully, I think even the GP community have now appreciated that fact, right? A lot of these amendments have come in very recent past with both the regulators. There is a kind of an appreciation words for both the regulators, and GPs are now being very mindful in terms of reciprocating, right? Making sure that there's a well-established governance practice so that as a whole country, India position itself globally at a very higher pedestal when it comes to the funds governance, right? Now, coming back to the question, Sambhav, when it comes to enforcement orders or even SEBI inspections, right? A lot of times there are questions about, not being transparent in terms of your conflict scenarios, in terms of disclosing it to your investors, right? That's something very important because a lot of investor trust is imposed on GP when it comes to conflict disclosures, right? Second, over the past, when it came to SEBI, we saw a lot of settlement orders when it came to maintaining skin in the game, right? Because there are regulatory requirements both under GIFT City, but in SEBI at least, even in SEBI, you have a continuing interest requirement, right? And SEBI saw a lot of settlement orders there where sponsors have not honored their skin in the game requirement, right? Which is something very important from an alignment of interest with investors, right? So that's something very important. Also, we've seen a lot of there was not a lot of emphasis on valuation. SEBI actually standardized the valuation process much in 2021, right? And post that also there are certain obligations on GPs to be very mindful in terms of disclosing the deviations, because there is a responsibility casted on GPs to ensure that if there is a substantial deviation in the valuations, you have to intimate SEBI or intimate investors, right? So a lot of inspection queries comes around disproportionate drawdown, defaulting contributors who may not have met minimum regulatory requirement, right? While and some of them may have not honored the contractual requirement. Then at times from investor grievance standpoint, we see a lot of calculation errors at times in calculating your management fee, or sometimes the fund documents are not very clear enough in terms of mechanisms, how the waterfall will run, right? So we see a set of investor grievance, then SEBI issues when they see your process towards, and the most important part, even about the investor consent process, right? There has been always a debate around whether the deemed consent is appropriate or not. Now, when SEBI has a consultation paper, the GP industry is going to get some clarity from a regulatory standpoint. But until this point also, right, there was always a debate whether we should, from a governance standpoint, opt for something like deemed consent process, or agree something, a different approach, which could be like a combination of deemed consent, and wherein you also follow with investors on a very periodic basis if you're dealing with some sensitive matters when it comes to consent requirement. So there has been a lot of learning on the conflict, on the risk management framework, in making sure that you disclose right kind of information to both investor and SEBI. There has been a lot of regulatory amendments where SEBI, in fact, got a very comprehensive annual activity report, right, where they are taking out all the details when it comes to investments, funds commitment raised, drawdowns, valuation details, right? And that is their treasure box to find out the gaps which are there on the governance side, right? So I think it's high time that GP gets their processes in order, not take governance as a cost, rather take it as a long-term investment from a growth standpoint, right? So I think, yeah, there is quite a few learnings.
Sure. So now what I'll do is, thanks, Anita. What I'll do is, given that we have, I think, so overshot the time, I just want to leave, make sure that we wrap it up also timely. Maybe another last 5 minutes of each of you, where perhaps, by the way, I want to open it up if at all somebody wants to raise a question from the audience. But I'll utilize this time to sort of do a quick sort of a, rapid fire, if I may, where, I just want to sort of hear quick answers, could be short and brief and perhaps whatever, 10, 15, 20 seconds, or I'll leave it to you. But intent is to get your immediate reaction on some of these points. And in the meantime, sorry, amongst the audience, if you have any questions, if you can show your hands or let us know, we can let you in. But maybe to start with, Dr. Shah, if I can ask you, not putting you to fire, I'm sure it's it's the other way around. But to hear from you, it'll be great. So let's say, growth or investor protection, right? If you had to pick one or prioritize one over the other right now, I think so. If I just want to hear from you, what wins from a regulatory perspective? How do you see this?
I think let me first say, when you said on rapid fire, we are used to fire, so
Right.
it's not a problem. On the question that you asked, I think it's a balance. You cannot just, as a regulator, focus on growth and only focus on investor protection. It has to balance. Then only the market can really grow. Market can really grow in a more governance and more risk managed manner.
Sure. And maybe the second question which I wanted to hear from you is, where do you see the regulator and the IFSC as a regime, as a jurisdiction geography growing? Like we heard some number scales from you about, let's say 1,000 funds and so on and so forth, right? But 5 years, let's look at a 5 years journey. Where do you see this? Is it, let's say why Gift City and why not any offshore jurisdiction? If that's as a question posed to you.
I think in last 2 years, what we have seen is, people have stopped saying that I want to set up a new fund in Mauritius. I think GIFT is clearly have come into play. In next 5 years, I think if we are able to answer this, that for an India strategy or for even for global strategy, GIFT comes as a first point of reference that, this is where I should structure my fund. That's where we should reach. Forget about numbers. I think numbers are only just somebody's tick box, but
Right.
it has to come as a first choice rather than being forced to go to X or Y location.
Sure. Great. Pratibha, if I can put you on the spot here, let's talk about clarity or enforcement. I mean, what does India need more urgently right now in terms of how you see the geography?
Oh, we are very good on enforcement. I think clarity for sure. Because enforcement whole structure, the dispute resolution community needs to solve for, but investors go to jurisdictions that provide clarity.
Sure. And what's that one word that comes to your mind most when, let's say, global investors are looking at India, and what are those, as a concern, like I asked you earlier? What is that one thing that comes to your mind on top?
I was thinking positive. I was going to say,
Great.
high growth potential. But on the negative, complex. Yeah, it's all C's.
Sure. That's how we started. Okay, great. Vyapak, for you, in high scale litigations or disputes, and let's talk about arbitrations for a moment, right? Dispute resolution as a mechanism. Indian seat or SIAC? Do you see, let's say in the AIF regime, if there's a dispute coming up, right? What do you see as a faster resolution?
I think I would say gift city sake, right? Because I think that's going to be the game changer in my view, which can address many other issues that India is facing. So I think the way the investor issues have been taken care of by Gift City as a regime, I think in my view, Gift City can become a huge, change agent for resolving disputes related to India or even
And
non-India in that sense. So
let's
I
say
would
if you
not
have
say
to give,
SIAC, no, I would
yeah,
not say India, I would say Gift City as a seat.
understood. And let's say if you had to give the topmost suggestion in terms of making the institutional framework strong in India, what would be that number one item?
Execution. I think Gift City, if at all Gift City or India as a seat has to become robust. Only thing in my view which is lacking is execution. We are at par or even better in most of the other parameters for dispute resolution, including availability of legal advice and advocacy. I think where we lack is execution.
Fair. Okay. Anita, bringing you in, let's say SEBI, IFSCA, or let's say an offshore jurisdiction for that matter, fastest fund setup route right now.
I think SEBI and IFSCA both. In fact, IFSCA was the premier in when it came to green channel, right? SEBI just announced Garuda, 10 working days for subsequent one. So I think SEBI and IFSCA both where you can set up your structures at fastest, because Singapore would take you around 8 to 9 months if you had to go for a mass license for a fund manager and then set up a VCC and all. Around 8 to 9 months. That's what our current information is. So both of them,
Okay.
SEBI and IFSCA.
Great. And lastly, in terms of, let's say, disclosure or discretion, right? Where do you see if, let's say, we are talking about fund disputes, right? Where do they really start in terms of
I
these
think
two?
a manager should not do like a selective discretion. And anytime when you're exercising discretion, keep in mind the all set of investors. Second, when it comes to disclosure, I think half disclosure is a no disclosure. So it's very important that you do a complete disclosure to your LPs or even to your regulators as a part of your regulatory reporting. So complete disclosure with a mindful discretion being exercised over certain fiduciary matters.
So I think one thing common between all the four of you is that there is a sufficient amount of balance which we need to maintain in each of the questions which I raise, perhaps. But that's always the right strategy, I guess. So maybe just to now wrap it up, Dr. Shah, if I can ask you if any closing remarks that you have would be nice to hear from you.
No, I would say that we'll continue to work with the industry, and we will try to make sure that all the policy and all the changes which comes in the IFFC law is for the betterment of the ecosystem. And obviously, we have a practice of doing the consultation paper before we make any changes. So we hope industry keeps participating, keeps giving their suggestions at the right time, so that before we form any policy or law, we have the inputs from all of you. And I'm sure if we all believe in India, I think we can do it in India. We have been doing it for Singapore, we've been doing it for Dubai, Mauritius, and now it's time to do it for India.
Sure. Comes from right at the top,
We,
where Make in India is a
we
big
make
focus.
we make India great again.
Okay. With that optimism and message, I think so. I would want to thank each of you, Dr. Shah, Pratibha, Vyapak, Anita. It's been really great. Thank you for your valuable time, for your valuable inputs. I'm sure the audience have learned and gained a lot out of this discussion. Most appreciated. A big shout out and thank you to the entire IVCA team, Rajat, Akriti, Khushwant, and everybody in the team who have supported and got this in place. Even on behalf of my entire team at Aequitas Law Partners, we are all very thankful to each of you. Once again, maybe I'm sure we'll have more sessions and hope to see you on the platform and rather more be in person. Like we discussed, it's not about not being able to be visible, but clearly the regulator was visible on this call.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shah, and everyone once again.
Yeah. And
Thank you.
just like one parting wish, I think there was one question, and maybe it's for Dipesh sir, right? There is a one great framework which has been announced in terms of consultation, right? Which is VCC framework. I think one of the participants want to see some kind of a timeline if we have in mind where this framework could come live, based on public consultation and of course various regulatory amendment being put in place. So do we have like some kind of a vision statement there in terms of timeline?
I think you already saw the government, particularly DA, issued the consultation paper. So it's a it's a stepwise process. I as a regulator I can commit on the timelines of the government, but government has already taken a step, asked for the public comments. And I'm sure this will be finalized. We do foresee this will happen soon. We can't put timelines on the on what will be passed in the parliament. As a
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much
Thank
once
you.
again. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Pratibha. Thanks.
Goodbye.
Thanks,
Have a good
Sambhav.
evening.